Welcome to another episode of Judge for Yourself. Apartheid will undoubtedly have a lasting legacy in South Africa. Indeed it has. Recent comments by President Jacob Zuma caused some debate in the public domain. During a speech, the President blamed apartheid for our current energy crisis. Some accuse his government of refusing to take accountability. Others argue that the effect of decades of institutionalized racism will continue to pose developmental challenges for years to come. Of course, this is one of the key issues because our constitution, which these programs are devoted to engaging with, really sees our society as developing to a non-racial and non-sexist one. The question, therefore, is where does race fit into this and how do we engage properly with the race debate? Where, for example, is it justified to say, well, it's because of apartheid? Where is it justified to say, well, we've had problems with apartheid, oppression for vicissitudes of history, but at the end of the day, we've also got to take responsibility for the particular problems which confront our society 20 years after democracy. If you'd like to join this discussion on Twitter, please use the hashtag #JFYBlameApartheid. Discuss this topic. We are joined by Nomboniso Gasa from the Centre for Law and Society, Louw from the Free Market Foundation, Shaka Sisulu, philanthropist and media entrepreneur, and Verashni Pillay, journalist and columnist. Well, let me start with you, because I think you wrote something recently that I read about this particular issue. And I'm just curious as to where you strike the balance. I mean, when President Zuma says, well, eskom is because of apartheid, I mean, do you accept that? Or do you say, well, you have had 20 years to deal with this problem?
So, that's a great question to ask. I mean, the balance and where does the line, where does one draw the line? My column was talking more to personal individual responsibility, right, and was talking more to kind of the glib response that sort of some white South Africans tend to have, where they say, let's move on, let's stop. Get over it. That move on thing, that is just not helpful to anyone in this country. So I was addressing more the personal, interpersonal relationship between South Africans. When it comes to government, of course, it's a bit different. I do have to say that sometimes the eNCA gets a bit of a raw deal. People don't realize quite the kind of challenges they were dealing with when they came into government, how much they had to actually overcome to actually govern. At the same time, you'd have to be blind to not acknowledge that there are certain mistakes that have been made that need not to have been made. There are certain governing crises that are happening that is of no fault except the ruling parties. So how does one then deal with this issue? I mean, let's take as common cause. We had 300 years of racist and sexist rule. I suppose we could go back further, but let's just cut it off there for the moment. And clearly this has shaped the fabric of our society in all sorts of ways. But it seems to me that our race debates in South Africa at present kind of get into strange kind of domains when we say, well, that's apartheid, and we just leave it there. That seems to me as glib as saying, you know, on the other hand, let's get over it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that once we get into a conversation that is either or, that is, you know, that's not apartheid, let's move on, it's 20 years, we've lost it already. I think we do need to recognize the fact that the very structural construction of the society rests on inequality that came through a long history of racial domination and subjugation, inequality that takes the form of economic exclusion, inequality that takes the form of race, gender, and all these kinds of things. And I think one of the issues that we've got to struggle with as a society is to try and understand and really grapple with the fact that we're not just talking about legacy or legacies of apartheid and colonialism, that we are talking about what people, the majority of people in this country, experience. Now, where do we locate the responsibility of government in the last 20 years, and where do we look at it in terms of the historical evolution of the society? I think that is a tricky part of it. Now, you know, when you go for a medical checkup, everybody wants to know, if any good doctor would want to know, your genetic makeup and your predisposition, therefore, to cholesterol, to diabetes and so on. It doesn't mean that because you've got that genetic makeup that you're necessarily going to move into the stage of having that. But it's an important factor in terms of how then the doctor tries to understand how to deal with you as an individual at a particular point. Now you also have a responsibility in ensuring that because you understand your history, your family history in terms of the medical history, your physiology, that there are certain things that you don't do in order to prevent that. And I think that societies are living organisms, and we don't seem to understand it. We seem to think that history happens and you park it there. It lives with us.
Leon, I mean, what history does still shape the society?
Of course, and it will do so well beyond our lives, I'm sorry to say to you. But, and also it's not binary, as you well said. It's a fuzzy mix of responsibility of the government of the day in any country and with what they inherited from the past. I would want to make a very simple point, though, that the worst thing this government has done is to perpetuate the legacy of apartheid.
Why?
It's kept everything it inherited. Exchange control, the idiocy of eskom, SA Airways, SAB, all the old apartheid monopolies, all the dinosaurs. It keeps elitist regulations that are as if no poor people exist in South Africa.
The question, I suppose, what Leon is saying is, we can disagree or agree whether, in fact, eskom is a dinosaur, and I suppose we can't disagree that eskom is giving us serious problems. But what I'm saying is...
Is apartheid being maintained?
But no. I mean, it's a question of who takes responsibility for mistakes. And in a democratic society, do we use the race card, or do we actually say, well, there is a legacy which is hugely difficult to deal with, but on the other hand, we make mistakes and we must be honest about that?
So let me just take a step back.
Yeah.
Because I suppose the premise even of the show is recently the president made a speech. And I remember I was at a conference where the president made a speech where, you know, you could infer that he's saying apartheid is responsible for this electricity crisis. What I found, and you would have seen even with his response to SONA, the president, especially when speaking to a large mass audience, tends to break things down and, you know, almost sometimes oversimplify things. And I remember I was in the audience where he was talking about the power thing, and in essence he was basically saying, look, demand is now outstripping supply. But how do you get to that point is he explains why is demand now outstripping supply. It's because you know, you are now switching on more and more people and you haven't switched on enough power connections.
But if you say to him, you see, I don't want to get into an eskom show, I've just had one. I think the point I'm trying to make is this, and by the way, I used the president merely as an illustration in the introduction. It wasn't, because I don't use Twitter, but my friends who do tell me that there have been a huge amount of tweeting on this particular issue in broad terms about race. Yeah. And it really is the question I'm trying to probe is, when do we sort of take responsibility for our actions, and when do we say, well, you know, goodness, we inherited 300 years, it takes a long time to actually fix it up. That's what I'm really trying to probe. But perhaps I'm going to take a break and then give you all an opportunity again to respond to that as soon as we come back.